Hello, friends, and welcome to Unseen But Believed, the podcast, where we talk about all things invisible illness. I'm your host, Anna Constantopoulos, and I've been chronically ill for over 8 years. If you've been listening to the podcast for the past month, you know that I've been interviewing fellow Miss Tennessee contestants about their experience with both invisible and mental disabilities. Today we have our last guest, Miss Madison County, Laura Valentine Lock. She runs a nonprofit called Laura Valentine Ministries, where she advocates for the abandoned child and for adoption, foster care, and anti-trafficking. In this interview, she speaks about her disability as a result of poor care before she was adopted and how she's making a difference. Hi, Laura Valentine. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Of course. Thank you so much, Anna, for having me. I'm so excited.
Hey. Well, as I understand it, you have an invisible disability, and I was wondering if you could tell us what that is.
Yes. So I have what's called an accommodative dystropia, which is, we just talked about it. It's a big term, but it basically affects my eye. So I was born in China and I was adopted during the one-child policy. And because of my poor prenatal care, I was diagnosed with an accommodative dystropia, which basically affects my eye vision. It's like a bad, lazy eye. So it affects my motor skills. It affects like the way I process things. It takes me 10 times longer to like read a phrase and understand that. So that's what I have.
You would never know that just by looking at you, which is why it's an invisible disability, I guess. And, you know, we know each other through the Miss America organization, and we all have a social initiative that we advocate for. So could you tell us a little bit about yours?
Yes. So mine is Fighting for the Forgotten, a champion for the abandoned child. So that kind of stems into me being adopted from China and then growing up and realizing I have such a blessed and privileged life. And so I wanted to help other abandoned children, you know, find their forever home. So I started a ministry when I was 16, and it's called Laura Valentine Ministries, which helps provide financial assistance for families who want to adopt but can't afford it. So I would go around speaking about my story, which is also so funny because I would talk about my accommodative dystropia and how, you know, our uniqueness makes us so much tougher. It has a challenge. We just have to embrace it.
That's an amazing work, and I think that's so needed in the world. And it's amazing how you're able to use, you know, your background and what you've been through in order to help other people. So for your disability, what kind of symptoms go along with that?
So for me, it's all about how I've struggled in school. You know, reading wise, if I'm staring at pages for a long period of time, all of a sudden my eyes don't focus anymore. It becomes very blurry. I get a headache and I just can't focus. Or with like my fine motor skills is, you know, you could see a thick line down the road and I wouldn't be able to follow that because something in my eye is like, oh, it's more to the left. Oh no, it's more to the right. Whatever it is, I just could never follow the line. In kindergarten, I always got put in the timeout zone because all my teachers thought that I was trying to be a class clown and not cut in a straight line or cut the circle right or the shapes right, when in reality, I couldn't see. I couldn't follow that. I couldn't track that.
Oh my gosh, that is crazy. I can't believe they didn't realize that like you weren't doing that intentionally.
I know, especially in kindergarten. I was like, wow, I really got like sent to the principal's office that early when, you know, kindergarten, you're learning how to cut. But I guess mine was so bad that it must have been like a star and I just cut straight through it.
That's so unfortunate. And I'm especially impressed that you're able to do pageants and to be able to, you know, walk in an evening gown and do all that stuff and follow the very specific patterns.
Yeah. Sometimes it's like, whoop, I veer off really, but I have to like really focus. And, you know, it goes to accredit my parents to realize that at a young age, there's kind of, you know, something off. And luckily, when I was brought to the United States, I was always in checkups, you know, seeing if my prenatal care was going to be better, how to, you know, revert all of that poor prenatal care. And so when they discovered that I had this accommodative dystropia, they put me in eye therapy. So I'd been in eye therapy my whole entire life until I think I was in, middle school. And so I actually, younger age, I had to wear an eye patch for most of the day during the school year.
How is that experience, especially, you know, was that in middle school that you had to wear that eye patch?
Yeah, a little like pre-middle school, but then I could wear the eye patch at home. And at first, you know, it was really hard for me because I already had to wear glasses. And so I think we've all heard of it, the joke of if you wear glasses, you're called four eyes. Well, people would call me five eyes because I had a patch too. And that was just really humiliating for me because especially as a young little girl, like I can't help it that, I was born with this. I had this condition. But to hear that from older kids making fun of you, to like other kids not understanding, and as a little girl also not understanding it fully, it was kind of rough. It was.
Well, I mean, I can imagine that affected your self-esteem a lot, but you're such a confident person now. What was that process like, going from dealing with that and being made fun of to, being a confident Miss America title holder?
Yeah, I think, it goes to the fact that it kind of ties into my ministry of, being very vulnerable about who I am, accepting, all our flaws. We're all human. And it's so incredible to see how the Lord has made us so unique. It would be boring if we were all perfect, if we didn't have this, if we didn't have that. There was one time I was speaking to a school and I told the story of how I used to wear an eye patch, but I overcame that because, I know who I am, and I'm going to use that quote unquote disadvantage to be like, hey, we're all different. We all go through trials, tribulations, but we can come out on top. Our weaknesses actually make us stronger. It also makes us empathize with other people. And after I was done speaking, all these little kids were coming up to me. And there's this one girl I remember, and I have a photo with her, and it just is engraved in my mind. She came up to me with this big smile, and I was just looking at her smile at first, and then I realized she had glasses and an eye patch on. And she came up to me and she gave me the biggest hug, and she said, "Oh my goodness, I wear it too. I'm so glad there's someone else." And that just really, I think I was around like 14, 15 years old when that happened. And it really just stood out to me like, holy cow, that is something so unique. But the fact that I went to a random school, I spoke to a random group of little kids, and there was actually one kid who could resonate with me. And not only that, a little girl looking up to me and being like, there's someone like me, and she's fine. She's good. She's overcome everything. And so that's just so touching to me. And I think as local title holders, that's something, that's what gets you going, with our social impacts. It's like those little kids who look up to us and are like, I can be that too.
I mean, that is amazing because, generally sharing a story like that, it will encourage people who have, generally dealt with a disability or generally been bullied for something like that. But someone who's literally going through exactly what you went through, and you are able to show her just how to overcome that, how to learn how to be grateful for what you went through. I mean, that's amazing. That's why we do what we do, right?
Yeah. And, I wish I had that when I was younger. So like to have women like us do that already at this age, and even our teens doing it at this age, it's just so incredible. It's such a blessing.
Yeah, it really is. And you're clearly being a blessing to so many people through all the work that you're doing. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for speaking out about your disability. I mean, it helps so many people. So going back to a little bit more of your story and how you got diagnosed, normally it takes a really long time to get diagnosed with an invisible disability, but it sounds like your symptoms showed up pretty early, right? Do you remember how young you were?
Honestly, I think I was probably in kindergarten pretty early because, again, being adopted from a foreign country, I had to go through a lot of, doctors checking me out, seeing if I'm okay, if I had any diseases or if I had any, underlying issues because, in China, they don't keep documents of familial history, especially because I was part of the one child policy. There's no record of who I'm from, where my mom is, where my dad is. So I had to go to a lot of doctors just to see if I, was okay, if I was adjusting to the States. So I think it was like pretty quickly. But again, even my kindergarten teachers didn't understand that I probably had a bigger issue than just, the typical little kid learning how to cut.
Yeah, and I wish they had noticed that because that would have been very helpful for you. But when was it your parents that first noticed that something was off? I think you mentioned that earlier. And how old were you when they really realized that?
I think I was probably around 4 years old, just, my fine motor skills, doing the basics, walking, writing, everything was off. Like it just, it didn't add up to the normalcy of like a little kid learning how to do certain things. And it was off.
Mm-hmm. And so how old were you when you got actually diagnosed with it?
I think I was around 4 or 5, I want to say.
Yeah. So pretty quickly after your parents noticed that they were able to figure out what was going on.
Yes.
That's good. And so how long was it until you got to a point that you didn't really need to worry about managing it? Or is it something that you still have to manage today?
Well, I don't do any more eye exercises, which I'm very glad, because every single day I would have to go home and do my eye exercises and then go to eye therapy. But it's something I still struggle with. Like, school has always been so hard for me, just because I'm continually having to over focus because of I can't. I had to take extra time on tests. I had to sit in a separate room so there would be no distraction, so I could actually focus on it. I had actually a teacher have to read the test sometimes to me, just because if I looked at too many words, my eyes would not focus, and I can't even do Scantrons because I can't fill in the bubbles. Because I would fill in like another bubble on the other side because I thought that was it. So school has always been hard for me. Reading, people always ask me, oh, what books are you reading? I'm like, I don't actually read. And not that I don't want to read, but it's more of, I get so tired and I get really exhausted. And it's just it's more of a chore for me than it is an enjoyment.
That's a lot to go through for such a long period of time. I mean, starting when you're 4 years old, through high school. Were you in college as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned, dealing with this throughout all of school and getting some accommodations. How did you feel about getting accommodations? Were your teachers understanding of that? Was that something that you were comfortable with?
Yeah, so my teachers were super understanding. I think it was just more of me having to explain to some of my friends because they didn't understand it. They were like, oh, you just wear glasses. They don't understand the actual struggle that I go through with this. And so it kind of, in high school and when I studied at university, it was kind of like, oh, is it just so you can get extra time? Like, what is this? This kind of like a quote unquote a fluke disability. And I'm like, no, it's what I struggle with. I've always struggled. I've had to work harder because of it. I've had to, SAT was like, oh my gosh, I think I was there for like 10 hours when it's usually like, what, a 6-hour test or something? Yeah.
That's exhausting. It sounds like you're just having to put in like double or triple the amount of work, and
kind of counterproductive because I'm already tired and now I'm here longer. But that was the only kind of accommodations that at that time they could understand.
Yeah, and it's hard too for people if they're not familiar with what you're going through. If you look totally fine, it's hard for them to understand what you need, and sometimes it's hard to communicate it. It's hard to explain when something has a very fancy, weird medical name, to exactly explain what's going on and how it affects you. And sometimes it affects us in different ways throughout our lives, different ways throughout our day. So I know that you have a full-time job now. So I was wondering if you could tell us how you've learned how to manage and balance that while also dealing with this.
Yeah, so I'm so lucky to be working in two of my favorite loves. So I'm the assistant admin of athletics and co-curricular programs at an elementary school. And that's kind of combining my two loves of athletics, sports, and children. And so it's been kind of a learning curve because my supervisor, who I love, who's been my mentor for years, we've had to work on some things because when you're the admin assistant, there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of studying, there's a lot of, emails and such. And so we've had to come kind of to an understanding of like, it may take me a little extra time to do something because I don't want to do it wrong or it look wrong. And so we've kind of worked out a very good system in the sense of like, she understands that it might take me a couple extra minutes to really read over her essays or her emails that she's going to send out weekly, or, respond to a parent because we're dealing with a situation and I have to really read through the big email, to make sure I get all those notes in, or, ordering athletic wear. They've been so accommodating. My supervisor, again, she's been my mentor for years. She's one of what I call my work mom, like tried and true. She is my work mom. So there's a different kind of relationship there where she truly wants what's best. And she goes the extra step more than just kind of a acquaintance supervisor.
Yeah. Well, that's so good that they've been supportive and understanding of that. And it sounds like you've learned how to advocate for yourself in a lot of different situations.
Yes. I'm not shy anymore about, speaking about it when I'm in a business professional workplace, just because I'm thinking, like internally, yeah, I want to keep it a secret because I don't want people to treat me differently. But then again, I'm like, how is this going to benefit them then? If they don't know XYZ and I'm doing something and then I quote unquote am not doing the right job, and they don't know that it just takes me a little longer, how is that benefiting me and how is that benefiting them in the end? So I'm very upfront about it when it is needed.
That's really good. And that's really important to keep in mind is often people want to help us. They want to help people get accommodations that they need. But if we don't communicate that, how are they going to do that? So if somebody's, nervous about advocating for themselves or nervous about talking about their disability, what kind of advice would you give to them?
That's a good one. I think nowadays, social media, everything is at the tip of our fingers. I think, again, going back to when I spoke and that little girl came up to me, I think it's about doing researching, finding someone that's, like you or I, and, reaching out to them. Because there's someone going to be talking about, their issues, and maybe you're not ready to, or expressing questions or not, but there's someone out there. There's someone telling their story. And if you can find that common ground, I think it's good to have like that kind of mentorship, and that's why I love how you're speaking about what you have. I'm speaking about what I have. It's just making it an easier way for people who are not quite ready to be very bold and brave about what they have, but it gives them an opportunity to know that they're not alone in it, that there's someone out there that's going to support you that has a similar story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I have this podcast, is because every guest that's been on here has said, if you have questions, reach out to me, because it's so much easier when you see somebody else who's maybe dealt with the same thing as you have, or have dealt with similar situations, trouble getting accommodations or things like that. And so please reach out to us. If Laura's okay with it, I'll put her social medias in the bio and send her a message if something like this sounds like you. Maybe you haven't gotten diagnosed with it, but maybe you've had some issues with your eyes and you can talk to her about it. Or, she's just very confident, so she can teach you how to advocate for yourself too. So I think that'll be really important.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I mean, that's why all the women in, the Miss Tennessee organization are so incredible in who they are, because they all have a personal story that goes along with their initiative. They all, they're brave enough to stand on stage and talk about it because they know that there's going to be a little girl or a little boy or even, an adult that has a similar story. And to hear that, and it makes you realize, we're kind of all the same, there's something about that. And that's just so beautiful in the sense that you don't have to feel alone in what you think is different about you.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message, because I don't know if this is the same for you, but dealing with a disability, especially a rare one with a funky sounding name, it's really easy to feel alone. It's really easy to feel like nobody can understand the symptoms that you're dealing with, or the pain that you might be dealing with, or how it affects every part of your life. But when you hear somebody else speak about it, even if it's a different disability, it's so encouraging, because okay, I'm not the only one that's struggled. I'm not the only one that's had to learn how to accommodate these different parts of myself.
Yeah, it's it really is. It really does make us human. I love that.
Yeah, it's so important. And, to anyone listening, I encourage you to speak about your disability. I encourage you to share about it if you're ready, because you could change somebody's life just with, a post on Instagram or just speaking at a school like Lauren did. That's just, amazing. So if you could go back to when you first started dealing with these symptoms, dealing with this disability, what would you tell yourself?
That you're going to be okay. That you're going to be okay, that it's not the end of the world, and that your disability makes you so unique. It adds a little special layer to you. I'm so happy that I did have that, because I think, again, how I said, I've had to work so hard at school because of it. I've had to work 10 times harder. But I think that also helped me with my work ethic. I really dive deep. Like, when I want something, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to work 10 times harder for it. I'm going to do what I can. And, that helped me pour into my ministry. I mean, we're working on our 36th adoption right now, and that's incredible. It's just mind-boggling to me. And you're going to be okay. Use that, elevate yourself. It's a wonderful thing. In the moment, it sucks. I'm not going to lie. It does. I mean, I'm not going to it's not rainbows and butterflies and whatnots, but there's always a good ending to it, I think, if you just accept it.
And thank you for sharing that, because it is important to acknowledge that it sucks sometimes. It sucks dealing with a disability, and it doesn't help anyone to sugarcoat that, to pretend that we haven't had to deal with these things going through school or still throughout our lives getting accommodations. But I mean, through Laura Valentine's story, you can hear that there is hope. She's doing so many amazing things. I mean, 36 adoptions, that is outstanding. That is just 36 lives that you have changed forever, probably more. And that is just such an amazing work, and God is clearly working through you. So be inspired by her story. She has dealt with so much and has been able to use it to help people. And that is just absolutely amazing. Well, thank you so much, Laura Valentine, for joining the podcast. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you, Anna. I'm so glad and honored to be on your podcast.
Thanks. Is there anything else that you'd want to add in before we go?
Watch us online as we compete for Miss Tennessee in a couple of weeks.
Yes, I will put the link in the show notes. That way, if you want to support me and Laura Valentine dealing with invisible disabilities, you can watch it and root for us. Sorry. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a rating or subscribe for future episodes. It's a small action, but it really does help to spread the word about invisible illnesses. Also, if you want to stay up to date on all things Unseen But Believed, go follow me over on Instagram and TikTok at Unseen But Believed. And remember, just because invisible illnesses are unseen, they should be believed.